the initiative kind of died with him. Turns out that a draft had made it to cabinet to 99, but there it still sits. The other consideration I have as a freelancer who's kind of trying to pay my own way out there is that I often get faced with absolute walls, bureaucratic walls. People just do not want to give you information now. I know from my experience when I worked in the States for a while, and the participation, my participation in South African media, is that having a Freedom of Information Act is one thing, enforcing it is another. There are huge costs involved in bringing a Freedom of Information application, because if they turn you down, just reject, you have to take them to court. It's impossible. The legal costs in this country are just so prohibitive at the moment that I don't think any newspaper here could do it unless they pick a case they want to champion and keep on punting it and maybe raise funds for it. It's just not affordable. The other thing is that if we're going to ask for information, there's a general lack of understanding in our public out there as, what information do you really want? What is it you really want to know? Just knowing things is not good enough. You need to know what it is you want to know. And there's been a general dumbing down of the public out there, I suspect, because we have a rather passive attitude in the media towards events. It always surprises me now whenever I do an expose that the other media doesn't pick up on it. Why not? Is it like a thing of ego? Is it because you think it's just me who know about the story? No, it's out there in the media. Read it and follow up. Call that minister, ask him, why are you doing that? We'd like your response. There's just, I find it difficult to understand really, but there is, a general lack of following up, and it also has to do with, clashes of personalities and, private agendas. And there's something we need to overcome. There's also a lack of institutional memory out there. People stand up and say things in public, public officials, where they blatantly contradict what they said, a few years before. But we can't remember what it is they said. And the point gets missed. And we don't hold them accountable to the things they say. I've tried to address things in a certain aspect. I just want to raise one more point. I've tried to address some of these things by putting up a website called Corruption Watch Namibia, where I kind of put out the old stories where you can go and read up on it. Because one of the failings in media is that we read things and, we're upset about it, but tomorrow there's a new story and then we forget. So, I'd like for people to comment on that.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Squire. The medias. I'll make it short. I just want to know the law which guides the medias to exaggerate the stories. Because sometimes you found that nowadays the newspapers are going back because people don't want to buy newspapers anymore, because they regard that most of the information which is on the newspapers are not true. So I just want now exactly the law, is there a law for the medias which guides them to exaggerate their stories? Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Johannes. I'm unemployed. Basically, I'm a regular user of Namibia Press Agency. I use it mostly on my mobile gadget. You find that stories that are carried today, that make headlines today on Nampa, most of the time they appear in a newspaper tomorrow. But it's kind of, it doesn't make sense to me to buy the newspaper anymore, because most of these stories, they are the ones that are dominating the newspapers. Now, I'm just wondering, these journalists that are working for the media houses, what do they do? Well, I mean, what do they do? Because these stories are they are just carrying the same stories into the newspaper, and you find that sometimes they do not even acknowledge that the story was carried out by Nampa. You see, they put their names there. I find that strange, and yeah. One thing more, again on Nampa, like NBC sometimes, they carry a story that was carried like maybe 2 days ago. But that story, probably there are new development on that story, but they do not make follow-ups to have, just to update the story, what happened later on. And another thing that I found strange again, I read a story on the internet, which was covering an event in Zupak, and the other one was carried out in a new era of Friday the 10th. The stories which was covering a Nana Trade Expo, in the two stories they are covering different events, but I found one line exactly the same. Now I have no idea whether it's the same author. If the same author, then it's self-plagiarism for me. Like what Ms. Brown said, most of the journalists are based in Windhoek. I find it beyond my comprehension to say that how many, most of the newspapers, you will find that there's a bigger population in the north. But how many journalists are based in the north? And for instance, people that were covering, for instance, a story in Swapo, the conferences in Caprivi, the story was written by someone who was based in Windhoek. How accurate that story is? I again have questions here. And again, the story of investigation journalists, I think Mr. Links, Mr. Hrobla, Amopadi, them, I think they maybe can help us out, their fellow journalists as to how do they do their work, And one last thing, I think, in terms of, I want the right to information law, so to say, to also accommodate students. You see, when like, I think if the IPPR is saying it takes 60 days to get a response or to get access to a certain information, what about students that are doing research? This is a problem that I've encountered like last year when I was doing my mini thesis. It is a problem, so I would want the RTI to also to accord the students that privilege.
Can we take one more?
Yeah,
and then
one more. Okay.
Robin Tyson, UNAM, short and sweet. First of all, for Sally, there was actually a program on KCR, Base FM, called Kudu Express, which actually was that. It was conversations taking place in a taxi in Karatura and what the people in that taxi were discussing. And it's quite an interesting type of program because it generates good conversations. My main point is we've heard throughout this conference that this idea of getting information is not a once-off process. It's a kind of ongoing dialogue. I think we heard this morning about, we need to go back and how do I get the water but how much water, and it goes on and on. And I'm just making a suggestion that, and I think Joseph mentioned that the SMS idea is maybe getting a little bit old-fashioned. What newspapers throughout the world are doing, which I like as a reader, is they have the story on the internet website, and then after that they have a conversation with their readers. So Robin will write something, maybe correct information that was incorrect in the story. The journalist will then write back and say, no, what I meant was this, and then John will write something, and it becomes an ongoing, living kind of dialogue. Unfortunately, with the SMS page, you only read 2 days later a comment on a story that happened 2 days ago. So it's just a suggestion that we can, as Joseph was saying, the social media, especially Facebook and these tools, but even a website, we can make it more interactive and lively. And in that way, I think the information actually improves, because even the journalist can then get in real time a reaction from the audience.
Back to you. You want this one? You don't like yours?
Thank you. And just maybe I'll start with the last question from Robin on the SMS pages. Yes, you're right. I mean, the SMS pages was a great innovation at the time. What you're referring to, news stories then on the web with the SMS comments underneath is way to go. But don't forget, a lot of the people are not only reacting to stories that have appeared in the newspaper, and I think this is what you have to keep in mind. It's important. Some of those people are SMSing something that is very important to their lives, particularly in rural areas. It doesn't have to do with a story that has been written. and it might concern pregnant women at a hospital in Ogongo who can't, get treatment and things like that. So I think one cannot ignore that there's an urgency to that hopefully your Ministry of Health officials are picking up on. So, yeah, I take your point that we need to drive it further into the new media era, but there's some people who that's still very important to access that. And had there just been a reader's letters page, they might not have taken the trouble to do that. And again, just hope government are listening. I'll go on to Hella, who on the investigative issue, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's what I said. Again, the demands of the public, there's not a very good understanding of the media and how it works sometimes. I was approached earlier by someone at this conference who said, what can I do at the Namibian? I can't get my press statement published. And I said, look, I'm not actually there anymore, but what is it about and so on. There is an expectation on a part of a lot of groups and organizations. They just want their press statement published verbatim, and often there are processes and news media, because it stands to reason we cannot publish everything and anything. There is a selection process, and depending on your readership and your penetration and the interest levels, a press release might be a very innocuous thing, might not even tell anything at all. And again, I think the point was raised in this morning's session about even NGOs. A lot of the NGO community want to do something that's in the public eye, have the media take a photograph, put it in the paper. Why? Really because of their donors. So, and what we really want to look at in the media is that process or whatever the donor's doing really working or not. So again, sometimes the expectations are different. And maybe I should draw a distinction here between news and information. We would, for example, get a press release, let's say, from the Ministry of Veterans Affairs, saying they're going to be paying out veterans at the following 600 points throughout the country. Will we publish that? Now, most of you will or won't understand that will take 2 entire newspaper pages to publish that, free of charge, and the only people that benefits are the people who will be receiving those amounts. Our wider public is not served by something like that. So again, we have to look at what is news and what is information. If we are asked by the Ministry of Health to put out that there's a clinic in Opuvo for children getting injections or something like that, again, it's a very limited thing. The media cannot do all these things, and there is an expectation that we must be all those things to the public and then still create news. It is up to really that ministry itself with officials in those areas to do their own PR campaigns and information, but where the media can help, and of course we do if it's the police who are looking for a wanted suspect, but if our newspapers or our radio programs were simply full of all these demands from everybody who wants space, we obviously wouldn't be doing what we're doing, and we'd have no room for investigative journalism. So I think that's important just to put on the agenda. The person who spoke about the exaggeration of stories, again, I don't guess that this is the topic of this. We're really looking at information access and how the media can improve it. Everybody's obviously got beefs of their own about this media or that media and whether they exaggerate. All I can say is you didn't give an example of the story, so I can't really react. If it applies to, I'm not sure which media, so again, fight your battle. If somebody has exaggerated a story that applies to you, go to that media institution and take it up on it. I don't think that's necessarily a question for this platform. I did emphasize ethics and the need for journalists to up their game and do a good job of investigative reporting. That's all I can really say. And the other young man who spoke again about also plagiarism and someone sitting in Windhoek and reporting on Caprivi, same sort of issue. Some of us do not have, like I would understand certain government newspapers or perhaps even NBC have a person stationed in just about every town in the country. Nampa is also covers a lot of the country. Some of us cannot afford and don't have budgets to put a person in every place. So obviously you've either got to send people out or count on news sources. There are different ways of doing news stories. So again, I can't comment on the individual cases, but where plagiarism and those sort of things happen, obviously that is absolutely unacceptable. Thank you.
I think, yeah.
I just wanted to correct Madam here. What I indicated is that there's two different stories, and one of the two overplays the other one in terms of what the listeners are looking for. Stories that have got to do with the social responsibility, or perhaps stories and issues, social issues that we discuss on our radio stations. There are certain radio stations that don't do that. There are the radio stations that do that, but we do see that in terms of reaction, only certain people react to social issues, whereas in terms of personal and perhaps other issues that are not really of significance, people react far much better. And I think it has been mentioned that in terms of information, some of it is noise, and that's why a lot of people are putting up noise, because that's what people are reacting to. I just also wanted to indicate in terms of the gentleman over here, as Gwen said, in terms of what we have, there is a media ombudsman. If you feel you're at the end of the day, there was a story that was exaggerated about you, you can, of course, make use of the media ombudsman to air your grievances. And I think there is a code of ethics. Yes, journalists need to up their game. And I also wanted to just make that suggestion that perhaps maybe Robin, as well as Madam Emily, to look into making use of people like Gwen and the Tilenis that you're talking about in terms of the on-the-job training. Perhaps maybe we should have that practical training, more of it, because I've experienced it as an employer of journalists that come with their BAs, and at the end of the day, the person is really struggling to get things right in terms of moving forward and disseminating information in the right way. That's some of the issues and the challenges that we are faced with as media houses, and I really would like to suggest that we should have that on-the-job training done by people that have got the experience and will be able to direct people in the right direction, other than just going through the theoretical way of doing things. I think that's...
Thank you. Just a short comment from me. I heard so many of the comments from the audience spoke to quality, immediacy, and accuracy. But I think there's another thing also, and that is tenacity. In 2004, when President Hifikepunye Pohamba took office, two of our student journalists, Jonathan Bierkus and Teleni Mongudi, had an appointment with the president, and the first question that they asked him was, Mr. President, what are you going to do about the ban on advertising in the Namibian? And I think that's courageous. You know, of course, his answer spoke as though the money spent on advertising came out of personal pockets, you know, but this is the kind of thing that you pursue. You then say, why not? So in terms of quality, far too often we still get single-sourced stories in the media, speech-based, you know, and no background reading had been done. Diversity of sources. Our students did a study on how children are covered. They did this along with Media Monitoring Africa. How children are covered. So, for example, if it's a story about floods in the north, it speaks of children wade through water that reach up to their chin and their books on their head. Is it a boy child? Is it a girl child? How would that story change if we said, if boys do this, what happens to the girls who have to pass through those snake-infested waters twice a day? And it's that kind of analysis. I think if there's a more engendered approach to our sources, or in terms of, yes, who's speaking? For example, our students complained about, and they complained about this to the media ombudsman, and I must say, Gwen is a favorite on our agenda to get her into our class. And the media ombudsman is the other person. And they said to the media ombudsman, you know, in our classes, in our training, we're taught that we need to have a diversity of sources. Women and men speaking, you know, whose voices do we hear? We hear because the heads of companies, of institutions, world bodies are mostly men. 80% of our sources are male, 20% female. So what has gender got to do with fairness and freedom of expression? Everything if 51% of our population is female. So we don't hear those voices, but this is what the young journalists encounter in media houses. They come with their sources, and the sources might be Emily Brown, it might be Umbi, and they say, hey, who's Emily Brown? Where's Libertina Madila? Let her speak. You know, so prominence still informs. Thank you.
I think Clip17 Amadilla is right next door. I think Gwen just had a question to answer.
Apologies, I skipped the defamation question, just to say that you probably know, and that's why you're asking the question, that I'm facing still from my time as editor a very big defamation case at the moment, which is costing a huge amount of money. And again, it's a very, very important case. Why? For the media. Because really what the litigant is seeking to prove is that the headline has absolutely nothing to do with the body of the story at all. And that if any ordinary reader looks at a headline and sees, and the headline in question was Katiti charged with theft, that everybody would think he's a thief and he had been in court and he had been convicted and found guilty. And our argument is that a headline has to be read with the story, and that the story in the first paragraph absolutely clearly says that he has been charged with theft by a person he's been in business with, and so on, and the story actually gave most of the space to him. So it would seem like a very vexatious case. It's costing a fortune, but it's vitally important for press freedom in this country, because if the case goes against us, it means that it will really have a chilling effect on the media, that every time somebody writes a headline, which obviously normally you're allowed a bit of license, you don't have the space to use a lot of words a lot of the time, and yet that case there's absolutely no interest whatsoever. The public couldn't give a darn, although ultimately and down the line their rights would be affected if this went against us. So again, it brings me back to the question of passivity, and maybe Karen could add that defamation law to her list, please. But it just speaks to, do people really care? At the end of the day, if a media house has to close its doors because it simply cannot afford these litigations anymore and defamation and so on, that will the public then say, oh dear, we miss them? So that's important. But your question about the law, there's nothing I can do to obviously draft a law, but we can get obviously media freedom bodies to take that up and possibly campaign against these defamation laws. It's another reason why we self-regulate, why we have the ombudsman there, especially, if I may say, for the smaller people. The big guns have no problem going to court. They've got the resources, they've got the money to do so. But at the same time, there are people, you know, ordinary people in Namibia who maybe are badly done by the media, as Emily also gave the example. And so the ombudsman is at least there. It is free access for them to go to and to lay any complaints about the media. Thanks. Karen.
Thank you. Firstly, I think just like I know, yeah, definitely, obviously we do take defamation into account as well. And I think there's a number of issues that I certainly didn't mention around media ownership, etc. The issue is just so, is so broad that yeah, that we haven't included everything within this paper. Just I think in terms of the point that was brought up about the fact that how are we ever going to enforce such a law because it's so expensive to go through the court system. I think this was also brought up yesterday in terms of how expensive it is to litigate in Namibia. And I think a very valid point was brought up that in fact the majority of Namibians cannot afford to go through the courts, and that really we can't afford to be a litigious society. And I think it's very, very important when looking at enacting this legislation and then also implementing it afterwards, that we really consider that litigation is really not going to be an option for most people. And taking that into consideration, I think that it's extremely important, firstly, I think to have a willingness on the part of public institutions to actually go forward with this, and I think that's why it's so important to have partnership, I think, with government when you're trying to bring these things in, because at the end of the day, they are going to be the people that implement this legislation. If they're not willing to do so, or they don't really understand the provisions of that legislation, then it's again, I always say this, but it's not worth the paper that it's written on. I think it's going to be so important that once this legislation comes in, that there is correct training, particularly for information officers, that there's correct training for citizens. There's going to be a lot of work to do. And again, I think it's very, very important, as you brought up, that we avoid expensive litigation. It's not affordable for most people.
Can I just ask a question? I just wanted to ask a question, and perhaps maybe my fellow panelists can help as well in this regard. And I want to ask this question so that everybody perhaps maybe have it at the back of their minds. We're talking about the nation as a whole. How are we going to sell this campaign to those people on the ground?
Is that
No, this one.
Thank you. It brings to mind the fact, and that question brings that to order, the fact that the new media technologies have actually uplifted exponentially your SMS pages and your talk radio. If it wasn't for this media, this technology, you wouldn't be doing what you are today. So it leads me to having to chastise you as media houses generally, that your embracing of new technologies such as app-ready solutions for your newspapers hasn't yet come to the forefront. None of you in the media today have acceptable websites that can actually be seen on mobile phones. It's an unfortunate problem. In trying to make comments to some stuff on Insight, I'm not targeting you specifically, Frederica, there was no reaction to my comments on a particular article on the website. So obviously, some ways, and to echo Robin's sentiment, it's very important that you do create websites that are readable on mobile technologies and that allow for conversations to develop. And I think that would then help you and those increasingly growing numbers of people using social media to respond to these issues that we are talking about this week. There are around 200,000 Facebook users in Namibia today. They're registered in Namibia. That's 20% of a population that are now probably using fairly smart technologies to do that, not computers. All right, so let's say 10%. But the point is that that's evolving all the time. And if you apply smart apps to that system, you'll be able to have people that don't really have the high end of technologies either. One area that you need to also consider in terms of social media is are sites like Ushahidi, which is an important social mapping solution. Ushahidi, Avaz, and all these other places where we can go online and actually comment and criticize systems that are not otherwise possible to do through edited SMS pages. So I think we must consider that conversations on new media are the way to go forward. We need to change it to a dynamic. Thanks.
I just wanted to maybe share regarding the bill that we have back home in Zambia. The bill does provide for people to go to the courts to seek redress when a request has been denied. but it also provides for an appeals body within the law that should be able to address those issues without those legal implications that you're talking about. So of course the appeals body also that is provided within the access to information law should be able to address the appeals, but if you're not satisfied, then that's when you'd go to the court route. So I don't know if maybe that would be a consideration to take into account. Thanks.
My name is Moses Mberira, filmmaker, local filmmaker. I just want to share a video clip that I have up front there that has got relevance to how important video is important to disseminate information to the rural areas.